Glass tapping against glass is supposed to signal a celebration. Instead, the chime of my sister's spoon against her crystal flute sounded like a judge's gavel. I had $3 in my checking account, sunburn on my neck, and a half-eaten potato salad in my lap when she humiliated me. My car had died twice on the way to Daphne's house. It's an old sedan that smells perpetually of damp floor mats and stale peppermint, and the air conditioning had given out 3 summers ago. By the time I pulled into her sprawling, freshly paved driveway in the suburbs, my cotton shirt was glued to my spine. I sat there for a minute, the engine ticking as it cooled, listening to the muffled thumping of a bass line coming from her backyard. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Mascara smudged under my left eye, hair frizzy from the humidity. I looked exactly like what I was, a 28-year-old woman drowning in late fees, trying to scrape together enough dignity to attend a family barbecue. I grabbed the glass bowl from the passenger seat. Potato salad. I had spent $12 on the ingredients yesterday, money I had mentally earmarked for a gallon of gas and maybe a cheap coffee before my shift at the bakery on Monday. But you can't show up empty-handed to Daphne's. It's an unwritten rule, punishable by months of passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. I had chopped the celery meticulously, boiled the eggs just right, mixed in the expensive mayonnaise. It was a pathetic peace offering, heavy and warm in my hands. The heat hit me like a physical wall the second I stepped out of the car. July in this part of the state wasn't just hot, it was thick. You could chew the air. I walked around the side of the house, my cheap sandals slapping against the immaculate flagstone path. Caprice. It was my dad, Thorson. He was standing by a massive, stainless steel grill that looked more like a spacecraft than a barbecue, flipping burgers with a pair of long, silver tongs. He wore a crisp polo shirt and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It rarely did these days, not since Mom passed, and left him trying to bridge the gap between Daphne's tax bracket and my lack thereof. "Hey, Dad." I leaned in, pressing my cheek against his shoulder to avoid the greasy tongs. He smelled of hickory smoke, expensive cologne, and the sharp bite of a pale ale. "Glad you made it, kiddo. Daphne was starting to think you got scheduled for another weekend shift." "No, I told her I had today off," I said, my voice tight. I glanced toward the patio. Daphne was holding court under a massive, canvas umbrella. She wore a white linen sundress that somehow remained completely unwrinkled despite the oppressive humidity. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek, effortless knot at the nape of her neck. She was holding a tall, sweating glass of something pink and sparkling, laughing at a joke her husband, Greg, had just made. Next to them sat our older brother, Brendan, swirling a craft beer and nodding along. I walked over, setting my glass bowl on the edge of the sprawling teak dining table. It landed with a heavy clunk next to a platter of artisanal cheeses and a towering bowl of organic fruit. My potato salad suddenly looked aggressively yellow and sad. "Caprice, you made it." Daphne turned, her smile practiced and bright. Her eyes dropped to the bowl, then back to my face. "And you brought, oh, potato salad. How retro." "It's Mom's recipe," I said, instantly defensive. The lie tasted like ash. Mom's recipe used cheap mustard, mine used Dijon, but invoking Mom was the only shield I had. Daphne's smile tightened a fraction of an inch. "Lovely. I'll have Greg put it in the spare fridge inside. We have so much food already. I'd hate for it to spoil in the sun." Translation: It's not going on the main table. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a nod. Sure. Good idea. For the next 2 hours, I played the part of the grateful guest. I sat on a woven patio chair that dug into the back of my thighs. I drank tap water out of a plastic cup, while everyone else drank Prosecco from actual glass. I listened to Greg talk about his recent promotion at the firm, nodding at the right intervals. I listened to Brendan complain about the property taxes on his new townhouse. Every conversation felt like a foreign language I was only partially fluent in. I was physically present, but socially, I was orbiting them from a great, cold distance. The smell of citronella candles began to mix with the heavy scent of roasted meat and sweet, decaying grass. Mosquitoes buzzed near my ankles. I kept my hands folded in my lap, picking at a chipped piece of black nail polish on my thumb. I just had to make it to dessert. Cut the cake, sing happy birthday to Greg, and leave. Then, the toasts began. It started innocently enough. Dad tapped his beer bottle against the grill and gave a short, gruff speech about how proud he was of Greg. Brendan raised his glass and made a slightly off-color joke about Greg getting older, which got a polite, scattered laugh. I was staring at a greasy paper plate on my lap, pushing around a piece of burnt steak with a plastic fork. My stomach was a tight, coiled knot. I hadn't eaten much. Anxiety is a hell of an appetite suppressant. Daphne stood up. The patio quieted down. The hum of the pool filter suddenly seemed deafening. She picked up a silver spoon and gently, rhythmically, tapped it against her champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. "I just want to say a few words," Daphne announced, her voice carrying that distinct melodic projection of someone who loves being listened to. She smiled down at Greg, then let her gaze sweep across the table. It landed on Dad, then Brendan, and finally, it stopped on me. The air around me seemed to freeze, despite the 90-degree heat. "We have a lot to be thankful for this year," Daphne continued. "Greg's promotion, Brendan's new place, Dad's clean bill of health." She paused, her smile widening into something sharp and brittle. She raised her glass just a fraction higher, looking dead at my face. "And of course to Caprice." My heart gave a stupid, hopeful flutter. To the one who always shows up, Daphne took a slow, deliberate sip of her Prosecco, letting the silence stretch, broke. The word dropped onto the patio like a lead weight. Nobody laughed. Nobody gasped. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick and heavy. I felt the blood drain from my face, rushing violently to my ears, leaving a high-pitched ringing in its wake. My vision tunneled. I looked at the table. Brendan was suddenly intensely interested in the label of his beer bottle. Dad was staring at the grill, his jaw clenched tight. Greg looked slightly confused, a nervous half-smile frozen on his face, waiting for the punchline. There was no punchline. I didn't flip the table. I didn't stand up and deliver a blistering monologue about the crushing weight of systemic poverty or the cruelty of her privilege. I didn't cry. Instead, my body chose the most pathetic, instinctual response possible. I smiled. It was a sick, jerky contortion of my facial muscles. I let out a short, hollow puff of air that was supposed to be a laugh, but sounded like a cough. "Cheers," Daphne said softly, ending the toast. She sat back down. The conversation slowly, agonizingly, restarted. The volume was lower now, hushed and strained. Brendan asked Greg a loud question about his golf swing. Dad started scraping the grill with a wire brush, the harsh, metallic scraping sound cutting through the thick air. I sat there, my hand gripping the plastic fork so hard the flimsy tines snapped against the paper plate. The broken piece of plastic fell onto my lap. I stared at it. I was 28 years old, sitting in a backyard that cost more than I would make in a lifetime, and I had never felt smaller. I lasted exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds at the table. I counted the seconds in my head, a desperate grounding technique to keep the burning prickle behind my eyes from turning into actual tears. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The smell of the burnt steak on my plate was making me nauseous. The citronella fumes stung my nostrils. At the 4-minute mark, I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the flagstone, silencing Brendan mid-sentence. "Just going to get some more water?" I mumbled to no one in particular. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the sliding glass door at the back of the house. I could feel their eyes burning into my spine. The heavy glass door slid open on its silent, perfectly oiled tracks. I stepped inside and pulled it shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the patio abruptly. The contrast was violently jarring. Daphne's kitchen was a cavern of white marble, brushed steel, and aggressively cold air conditioning. The sudden drop in temperature raised goosebumps on my damp arms. The air in here smelled sterile, a mix of artificial lemon cleaner and the faint, metallic hum of the massive sub-zero refrigerator. I walked over to the kitchen island, a slab of veined quartz the size of my entire apartment living room, and gripped the edge. The stone was freezing against my hot palms. I dropped my head, taking shallow, ragged breaths. Don't cry. Do not cry in her house. Do not leave a tear on her stupid, perfect floors. My throat felt swollen, lined with sandpaper. The humiliation wasn't a sharp pain. It was a dull, spreading ache deep in my chest. It was the absolute confirmation of what I had always suspected. To them, I wasn't Caprice, the sister who worked double shifts to pay off medical debt. I was Caprice, the cautionary tale. The punchline. The charity case who brought sad potato salad to the rich folks' party. A soft click of the sliding door handle made me flinch. I straightened up instantly, furiously wiping the corner of my eye with the back of my hand. I turned around to see Daphne standing in the kitchen, carefully pulling the heavy glass door shut behind her. She looked perfectly calm. Her linen dress hadn't shifted. She walked toward the island, her espadrilles making no sound on the hardwood floor. "You left your plate," she said, her tone casually observational, like she was pointing out a change in the weather. I stared at her. My chest was heaving slightly, but I forced my voice to stay level. I lost my appetite. Daphne sighed, an elegant, weary sound. She walked over to the built-in espresso machine, picked up a spotless white microfiber cloth, and began buffing a non-existent smudge on the stainless steel. "Oh, come on, Caprice," she murmured, not looking at me. "Don't do this. Don't be so dramatic." "Dramatic?" The word clawed its way up my throat. "You humiliated me in front of the whole family." It was a joke. She stopped buffing and finally looked at me, her blue eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "You're always so sensitive." I was just making a light-hearted observation. "We all know things are tight for you right now." "Things have been tight for me for 5 years, Daphne," I shot back. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the marble to steady them. "And you didn't have to announce it to a table full of people, like it was a toast." "Well, maybe if you actually let us help you, it wouldn't be a secret to keep," she snapped, the veneer of politeness finally cracking. She tossed the cloth onto the counter. It landed with a soft, lifeless slap. "Dad worries about you constantly. Brendan avoids talking about his life because he's afraid it'll make you feel bad. We walk on eggshells around you, Caprice." "I have never asked any of you for a single dime," I said, my voice rising, vibrating with a raw, ugly anger I usually kept buried. "That's exactly the point." Daphne stepped closer to the island, leaning across the marble. I could smell her perfume now, something floral and obscenely expensive, layered over the faint scent of Prosecco. "You're so stubborn. You show up here, in that car, wearing clothes that look like they came from a donation bin, bringing a potato salad nobody wants to eat, just to prove some twisted point about independence. It's exhausting." The words felt like physical blows. They hit my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. It was the precision of her cruelty that stunned me. She hadn't just insulted my bank account. She had dismantled my entire coping mechanism. My pride. The only thing I had left. I looked down at my hands. The skin around my fingernails was rough, calloused from washing industrial baking pans. My cuticles were dry and peeling. I looked at Daphne's hands resting on the marble across from me. Her nails were a flawless, glossy almond shape, smooth, unblemished skin. Hands that never had to touch dirty dishwater or count pennies at a gas station register. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that heavy ceramic fruit bowl off the counter and shatter it against the pristine white cabinets. I wanted to see her flinch, really flinch, for once in her perfectly insulated life. But I didn't. I just felt profoundly, agonizingly tired. "Where did Greg put it?" I asked, my voice suddenly very quiet, hollowed out. Daphne frowned, thrown off by the shift in my tone. "Put what?" "My potato salad. Where did he put it?" She gestured vaguely toward the massive walk-in pantry in the corner, the overflow fridge in the pantry. "Why?" I didn't answer. I turned away from her and walked across the cold floor. I opened the pantry door. The light flicked on automatically, revealing shelves lined with neatly labeled, uniform glass jars of organic grains and imported pasta. At the back sat a secondary stainless steel refrigerator. I opened it. There, sitting on the bottom shelf next to a case of imported sparkling water and a block of aged Gruyere, was my glass bowl. Condensation had already formed on the plastic wrap I had stretched over the top. It looked ridiculous in there, utterly out of place. I picked it up. The glass was heavy. "Caprice, what are you doing?" Daphne's voice came from the kitchen, edged with genuine annoyance now. "Are you leaving? Because if you storm out, it's just going to ruin the whole afternoon for Dad." I carried the bowl out of the pantry. Daphne was standing by the island, arms crossed over her chest. "I'm not storming out," I said quietly. I walked past her, heading toward the mudroom that led to the garage. "I just realized you were right." "Right about what?" I paused at the door, the heavy bowl resting against my hip. I looked back at my sister. The kitchen lighting was harsh, casting faint shadows under her eyes, making her look a little older, a little sharper. "Nobody wants to eat this," I said. I opened the door to the mudroom and let it click shut behind me, the heavy silence of the house finally swallowing me whole. My car was parked at the very end of the driveway, baked by 3 hours of direct afternoon sunlight. The interior was a terrarium. When I opened the driver's side door, a wave of trapped, superheated air hit me in the face, carrying the distinct odors of melting dashboard plastic and the stale cinnamon gum stuck in the cup holder. I shoved the heavy glass bowl onto the passenger seat, not bothering to buckle it in. I slid behind the wheel. The vinyl seat seared the back of my thighs through my thin cotton shorts. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it, praying to whatever indifferent god governed old sedans. The engine cranked, a harsh, grinding, mechanical whine. It didn't catch. I closed my eyes and gripped the steering wheel, the textured plastic burning my palms. "Please," I whispered to the empty car. "Not here, anywhere but here." I tried again. RRR vroom. It choked, sputtered, and finally roared to life, idling with a rough, uneven rhythm that vibrated up my arms. Before I could shift into reverse, a heavy knock thumped against my window. I jumped, my foot slipping off the brake for a terrifying microsecond before I slammed it back down. I turned my head. Dad was standing outside, squinting through the smudged glass. He had taken off his grill apron, but a faint smudge of charcoal still marked his left cheek. I grabbed the manual crank and rolled the window down halfway. The suffocating outdoor humidity instantly rushed in to compete with the suffocating indoor heat. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. He leaned down, resting his forearms on the bottom of the window frame. Up close, the deep lines around his eyes looked pronounced, carved into his skin by years of stress and solitary grief. "I have some errands to run before my shift tomorrow," I lied smoothly. My voice sounded remarkably steady, completely disconnected from the tight, frantic fluttering in my chest. Dad looked at the bowl of potato salad sitting shotgun. He looked back at me. He knew. Of course he knew. He had been sitting right there when the guillotine dropped. "Caprice," he started, his voice dropping into that low, placating register he used to use when Mom and I would fight. "Your sister, she has a sharp tongue. She always has. She thinks she's being witty, but she just lacks a filter. You know, she doesn't mean to be cruel. I think she means exactly what she says, Dad." I kept my eyes focused on the windshield, staring at a dried bird dropping near the wiper blade. If I looked at him, if I saw the pity swimming in his eyes, I was going to crack. "She worries about you. We all do." He shifted his weight, his arms scraping slightly against the doorframe. "You're working yourself to the bone, and you've got nothing to show for it. It's hard for us to watch." "Then look away." The words came out sharper than I intended, a brittle, ugly sound. Dad flinched, pulling back from the window slightly. A beat of heavy silence settled between us, filled only by the rattling idle of my dying engine. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open, his thick fingers bypassing the credit cards and pulling out a crisp, green bill. He folded it in half and reached through the window, trying to tuck it into the dashboard tray next to my speedometer. "Take this," he mumbled, not making eye contact. "Get yourself a decent dinner tonight. Fill up the tank." I looked at the $50 bill resting against the dusty plastic. It was a lifeline. $50 meant I wouldn't have to choose between keeping the lights on and buying groceries this week. It meant I could breathe for exactly 5 days. My stomach physically ached at the sight of it, a hollow, gnawing hunger that had nothing to do with food. And yet, I couldn't touch it. Touching it meant Daphne was right. Touching it meant I was the charity case they all agreed I was. I picked up the bill by the very corner. I held it out the window. "I don't need it," I said. Dad stared at my hand, his jaw muscles feathered. "Don't do this, Caprice. Don't let your pride make you stupid." "I have plenty of gas. I'm fine." I thrust the bill closer to his chest. "Take it back, Dad." He didn't move. We were locked in a pathetic standoff, framed by the window of a car that wasn't worth the tires it sat on. Finally, with a heavy, defeated exhale, he snatched the money from my fingers. He crumpled it into a ball and shoved it deep into his pocket. "Fine," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "Have it your way. You always do." He stepped back from the car. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer a forced smile. I just grabbed the gear shift, threw it into reverse, and let my foot off the brake. The tires squeaked loudly against the pristine blacktop as I backed out. I kept my eyes firmly fixed on the rearview mirror until I turned out of the neighborhood, watching the sprawling house and my father's shrinking figure disappear behind the manicured hedges. The drive back to my apartment took 40 minutes. I rolled all 4 windows down, letting the hot, rushing air whip my hair around my face. The wind drowned out the rattling of the dashboard and the grinding of the transmission. It was loud and chaotic, and it forced me to focus on the physical sensation of driving rather than the stinging humiliation echoing in my skull. At a 4-way stop near the highway on-ramp, I hit the brakes a little too hard. The glass bowl on the passenger seat slid forward, tipped over the edge, and landed upside down on the floor mat with a dull, heavy thud. Damn it! I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. The car behind me honked, a sharp, impatient blare. I hit the gas, crossing the intersection, my eyes darting down to the mess. The plastic wrap had burst open upon impact. A glopping yellow pile of potatoes, celery, and expensive Dijon mustard was now seeping into the cheap, carpeted floor mat. The smell of vinegar and boiled eggs instantly filled the cabin, potent and sickening in the suffocating heat. I pulled into the parking lot of a dilapidated strip mall a few miles down the road. The asphalt was cracked, weeds shooting up through the fissures. I threw the car into park and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy and ringing. I sat there for a long time. The adrenaline was finally leaving my system, draining away and leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. I reached down into the footwell. My fingers dug into the cold, sticky mess. I managed to right the bowl, scraping a handful of the ruined salad back into the glass. My hands were coated in mayonnaise and grit from the floor mat. It was disgusting. It was utterly, perfectly pathetic. I grabbed a fistful of fast food napkins from the glove compartment and started violently scrubbing my hands. The rough paper tore against my skin, leaving tiny white shreds stuck to the grease. Then, the laugh came. It started deep in my chest, a weird, bubbling pressure that I couldn't swallow down. It climbed up my throat and broke out of my mouth, a harsh, jagged sound that was completely devoid of humor. I laughed at the stupid potato salad. I laughed at the $50 bill I had turned down out of pure, obstinate spite. I laughed at my sister standing in her freezing, sterile kitchen, convinced she was the victim of my poverty. I pulled a plastic fork out of the glove box, a leftover from a late-night drive-through run. I leaned over, scooped a relatively clean bite of potato salad from the bottom of the bowl, and shoved it into my mouth. It was warm. The potatoes were slightly underboiled, offering a firm, starchy resistance against my teeth. The celery had lost its crunch. It wasn't Mom's recipe. Mom's recipe was made with cheap ingredients, but it tasted like a Sunday afternoon. Mine just tasted like desperate effort and Dijon mustard. It tasted exactly like trying too hard. I swallowed the bite, leaning my head back against the headrest. Staring at the stained fabric of the car roof, a quiet, brutal clarity finally washed over me. Daphne's toast wasn't actually about my bank account. It wasn't about the fact that I couldn't afford a new car, or that I wore the same 3 shirts on rotation. It was about her. She needed me to be the failure, so she could be the success story. My struggle was the contrast she required to fully appreciate her quartz countertops and her husband's promotions. As long as I kept showing up to her perfectly curated events, sweating in my cheap clothes and offering my sad little bowls of food, I was actively playing the part she assigned me. The grateful, broken jester in her court. I looked down at the bowl. I didn't want to fix the messy, broken parts of my life just to impress her. I just wanted to stop bringing them to her house for inspection. I rolled up the window, turned the key, and coaxed the engine back to life. I drove the rest of the way to my apartment complex in silence. I parked in my assigned spot, under a flickering yellow security light that hummed like a dying insect. I gathered my purse. I looked at the glass bowl, half empty and coated in grime, sitting on the passenger side floorboard. I left it there. I locked the doors, turned my back on the car, and walked up the 3 flights of concrete stairs to my apartment. The air was still thick and unforgiving, but for the first time all day, my hands weren't shaking. Tomorrow, I had a 12-hour shift smelling of yeast and burnt sugar. The day after that, my electric bill was due. I was still broke, I was still tired, and I was still profoundly imperfect. But I was finally done showing up. If you found a piece of your own messy family dynamic in this story, hit the like button. We've all been the punchline at a dinner table, or the one biting our tongue just to keep the peace. Subscribe to the channel for more deeply honest stories about the raw, imperfect reality of human relationships. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that they aren't alone in the chaos. See you in the next one.